Hi everybody, it's Leigh with the Creative Aging Program, and today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do some acrylic. So we're going to do a black and white acrylic flower painting. And so the materials, black and white acrylic paint, gray acrylic paint, if you don't want to mix, acrylic paper, and basically acrylic paper it kind of has the texture of canvas, but it's actually paper. It's like cardstock, and if you don't have that, you can definitely use cardstock or just something thicker, like a mixed media paper, cardstock, cardboard, anything that will hold up to acrylic paint. And then you're going to want paint brushes of various sizes, because it's helpful to have a bigger one for the background, and then your other smaller detail brushes. And then you're going to need, obviously, a paint palette, something to put your paint on. You can also use another piece of cardboard for this. You can use paper plates, anything like that. It doesn't have to be fancy. And then another thing is painter's tape. Because on this, what I really like is on these that have the white border, what I did is I actually taped the acrylic paper to the table. And so then when you're done with your painting, plus you don't have to worry about it getting out of line. And then once you are done with your painting, you can take the paint off and you have this really nice built-in border, which kind of gives the painting a really nice finished presentation. But you certainly don't have to use it if you don't have it. Painter's tape, I like to use it because it's not quite as tacky or sticky as masking tape. But honestly, whatever you want to do now, Scotch tape will probably rip your paper. So just be careful with that. So, all right, and what we're going to do is I'll show you how I tape the paper down. But you can certainly do whatever feels good to you. So, all right, let's get started here. Just give me a minute. Oop, I need this. All right. Okay, gather these up. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about these others, and these will be included with the, reference images in the lesson plan. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is, and I'll try not to get too much in the way, is you can pretty much use any width of painter's tape. This is kind of the medium one, and you just figure out how you want your paper oriented, if you want it vertically or horizontally. And you can certainly cut your paper down to smaller size too. And just make sure it's kind of in a comfortable place for you. And what I'm trying to do is you can make a really fat border if you want, or something narrow. Just try and keep it basically kind of consistent. It does not have to be perfect, that's for sure. So I'm just going to kind of go around here and get this down. And so what I do is I try to make sure, even painter's tape, even though it's it's not as tacky as some masking tapes, it can rip your paper too. So what I like to do is really kind of stick it hard to the table. But then, and I do want to get a nice edge here, so I put my finger along the edges on the inside edge, but I try not to really rub it hard in the middle of the tape, just to kind of give it a better chance of coming off smoothly without too much of your paper underneath. So, all right, and you can kind of see that this is basically even, not exactly, but you know what, it's all right. And the nice thing is later on you can actually trim it down if you feel you need to. Okay, so next I'm going to get my paints out here. Brushes. Alright. So now what we're going to start to do is, and I don't know if you can still see these, but personally, I like to have a nice variation in the background. We're going to do some color blending today. And the great thing about using a limited palette, black and white, is just that you pretty much every color that you're making, you're going to make black, white, and gray. So when you're working with it, that blends in really well. So you can kind of create a cloudy look or a little more striations. Now, if you want, feel free to like do a solid background too. If it's easier for you just to do a solid black background, if you really like that high contrast. Even though this is mostly black, it does have some gray in it, just to kind of give it a little more depth. Now this one, I think has a black background. You're going to cover up most of it, or it even may have gray. I don't remember. And so the first step we're going to do is actually, we're going to paint the whole background. So just figure out if you, and I'm just going to mix, you know, you can use gray paint. I personally like to mix the black and white together just to kind of, I like to have a little bit of mixture going on. So I want to have a darker background, so I will start with some black. And so what you're going to do right now is this has some of the white, so it's got some grays, but you can kind of just kind of mix as you go, so you can kind of have, and there you can do long streaks if you want, but I personally kind of like to do little short strokes. And when you're getting to the edge here, I always bring the brush, I start on the tape and bring it over, because if you're pushing it towards the tape, sometimes you have a tendency to get paint under the edge of the tape. And so I just kind of like to safeguard against that and just kind of do it and just kind of get it on here and just kind of have fun. And so we're kind of working fast just to get the background in here. But it's already, you know, and then you can add, the nice thing about acrylic is if it's not really how you're liking it, once you're done, that's okay. You can paint over it. But we just need to get a layer of paint on here for our background. So, and the faster, you know, I like to pull it across, then, you know, just keep moving your brush. And, you know, some acrylic paints dry really fast, and that's all right. So just keep adding paint. And I have a little cup of water here, but that's really basically only to slightly get my brush a little wet on occasion when I need to, just if it seems to be drying too quickly. I'm not adding water really to the paint, but I know usually in class we just have you use a different paintbrush, but since everyone's kind of working at home, you know, we don't want to get your brushes so gummed up that you can't paint anymore. So all right, we're just carrying it on over. Yeah, and this just takes a minute, and you want to make sure you get plenty of paint on here, but you don't want it so thick and gummy that you have to wait a long time before you can really start painting your image on here. Because what we're going to do is when we're done with this background is we're going to actually then take the white paint and use a smaller brush and actually draw the flower, draw the outline of it with paint. So, you know, that's why we're not using any pencils today. We're going to use the paintbrush as the drawing tool and the painting tool. So, all right. And you just want to make sure you have the edges nice and tiny. And you can, so I kind of like to have this looks a little moody, and so I just want to, which I like, but that's just me. You all do it. Okay. And you can always add more black or white later, but I wanted the majority of this to be darker because I'm going to do a lighter flower. But here again, I kind of want to make sure So This one has a much darker ground. This one has a nice bit of lighter stuff from the top, but that's okay. And these are a combination. And if you want to go back in later and add that, that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is use a different round brush to draw the shape of, draw the shape of the flower. I'm going to do a daffodil. So I'm just going to, and now the nice thing about sketching with your paintbrush is basically I'm starting out in the center here and then just doing some big petals. And it may look a little weird initially, that's totally fine. So what I'm doing is basically just getting in these shapes just so I can kind of know where to start. Okay. And like I said, you can adjust this stuff all you want later. So, and you can have it, you know, this kind of has a leaf coming up here, so. And it's okay if I'm painting, you know, that looks really odd, but that's all right. I just am giving myself some information, some place to start. And then because this is actually going to come out a little bit more here, and then you've got your little thing in here. Ooh. And so as you can see that even though I'm using the white paint, it is, it's still going to create a lot of gray initially because everything's wet underneath. So what you're going to want to do, and okay. Yeah. So, and the thing about acrylic though is you got to make sure you rinse out your brush, you know, or use a different brush if you're trying to use white on top of this stuff. So now basically you're just gonna, and you know, we've talked about directional lines. So like I want to start with a layer of white and I'm just going to kind of fill out these petals. And I'm just, see how I'm just kind of pushing it up. And this doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to do a lot of layers of acrylic paint. But see how just by following the edges of the petal, it's creating that, it's giving it some dimension because I'm not doing it in a straight line. Okay. And basically I'm just going to kind of go in here and do this kind of quickly. So, it's just, and you know, and this, as with all of the stuff, you're not going to be done in 5 minutes. Because as you all know, that acrylic paint, it just takes lots of layers of paint. And, you know, one of the nice things too is if you're in here and you've started with a certain image and you want to change it up, that's totally fine. And it's going to look kind of odd for a while. And if I started out doing this as a daffodil and I think it's really not looking very good or looking a little strange, then I can just make it into whatever kind of flower I want. It doesn't have to look, you know, specifically like something. And if you love snapdragons and know what they look like in your head, feel free to do those as well. So, a lot of what we're doing today too is just kind of having some nice contrast between the light and the dark. And grayscale is pretty interesting just to kind of keep going. It's just a different way of painting. You know, people are used to doing a lot of painting in color, and this is kind of a way to look at things a little differently. So, I mean, you can see how the petals are kind of coming together in the... Oh, let's get going. That's okay. So we're just going around and it's good that, you know, because I'm dipping into the white, but it's blending in with the gray and black underneath, which is good. That's what I want it to do, because that's how you're getting your nice underpainting of the flower. And it's okay if I accidentally get into that other stuff, that's totally fine. Because the center, you know, is actually coming out. You know, the daffodil has a real three-dimensional center, and so it's going to cover up some of the petals anyway. And that's just fine. Okay. Woo! My daffodil is looking a little funny. But that's okay. Just keep going. And a lot of this, you know, as I've said, like a broken record, which I say all the time anyway, is that a lot of this is just about the process of doing. Because if you haven't done this a lot or haven't done it in a while, it's just about learning how to use, you know, your paintbrush with acrylics and get a certain kind of look. And it's not always about loving absolutely what you've done at the end. So, you know, art is a learning process, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, and the better you get. So, the center part is kind of really delivery. Just got a little edge here. So, like I said, I'm just kind of getting in all these basic shapes, and it's a strange perspective too. So this is going on to the inside. Yeah. And this doesn't really look like anything right now. It looks really weird. So, but that's part of it. You keep building it up. And then each time we're going to go over and then this one, you know, is kind of a large brush, so if you want to, get a slightly smaller one and start adding a few more details in. And so what we're going to do is just kind of start adding some more. So this will end up being a little bit darker gray, because everything is still kind of wet, so, but I'm trying to add a little more detail in the petals. So in every little bit kind of adds some detail. Okay, so what I did is I kind of adjusted some of the big leaves around the daffodil, and then also I wanted to focus on something other than just the flower, because the flower needed to dry a little bit before I start adding more white, because I want it to be brighter so I can have nice contrast between really bright white, some gray midtones, and then the black. So you have nice high contrast. So what I'm doing is I'm using a flat brush, and I actually added some over here too. So what I did is I just used the side of the brush, or the, however you want to call it, edge or side, and just, you know how the big plant leaves have nice long striations. So, and here again, when I'm at the tape edge, I'm just pushing it up. And if you bump into your flower petal, that's fine, because you're going to actually paint over it again, or paint over the leaf, because you're still going to go over your flower some. Because it's actually nicer if you can just go have a long stroke through it, but if you have a lot of paint built up, then you can kind of just float across it. And see, since I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the brush and on the paper, if I'm just doing a line that bounces up over the tape, that's really okay. It's mainly when you're doing your background and you're pressing really hard that you don't want to push it towards the tape and, you know, risk getting paint underneath it. So, and then you're just keeping, oops, I just painted over. See, I did a new line for that leaf and I totally forgot about it already. So, now what I want to do is I've got some of this in here and I can mix some white and mix some gray and just kind of fill in this a little bit in here. So I'm bouncing back and forth between. And then once this is set up, you'll come back and add, you know, more details with a smaller brush. And I think this is a little short one, so. And you'll just keep doing this and keep adding more detail, but just remember that you want to make sure that when you're adding paint, because if it's really wet and you have a lot of it, the more it's going to continue mixing. So if you want a really bright white, you want to make sure that you let stuff sit and dry a little bit so you work on something else while you're letting it set up. So now I'm going to come in here and get some white, and that's just mostly white. So I'm going to start kind of adding in more white in the flower petals. And I haven't put as much black in these, but that's okay. Plus, if you want to change the edge of your flower petal, I'm just going in here with the, and I'm not pressing overly hard too right now, because I know that the harder I press, the more it's going to, if that gray underneath is still a little wet, the harder I press, the more it will mix with it. Now, if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. But if I'm just trying to kind of start getting some more highlights in here, then I don't want to press as hard. So I'm just kind of seeing, when I'm going back over it, it's kind of blending it back in. And I'm going the opposite direction because I want the tips of the flower petals to be brighter white. Whoop. And this is a very happy petal. I think it's the biggest petal on here. So, you know, and another thing too, as I, you know, pretty much say every week, is that if it's looking strange to you, this time it's harder. You can't just pick up your picture because it's taped down, but you can stand up, or if you want to, you can peel the edges of it off, but it's just harder to get it, so you can lift it up and get some perspective. So if you can just kind of stand up and kind of look down at it so you can see it differently. So I'm just going to kind of go around here and add some white. And, you know, as with all this stuff, it's just a slow process. And if you go, oh my gosh, I got too much gray in there, just kind of try to rinse and then wipe your brush off so you're just getting white paint. So, yep. So see, this really is pretty simple. You just keep slowly building up your layers of color. And then you just figure out where you want your highlights. And then what I'm going to show you here in a minute is when you take the tape off, that gives it a really nice presentation and finished look. but it also is helpful so that because your edge is going to be really bright white, it will help you know where to put, not necessarily where to put a highlights, but it'll, you know, let you know how much white you need to add in for your really bright whites to have that really nice bit of contrast. And it may be just exactly where you want it when you take the tape off, and that's great. So you just want to make sure that all of the stuff that you're, you know, anything that goes over the edge, you want to make sure you have all of that squared away before you take the tape off. You can do any kind of little detail work. And, you know, and if you have a really steady hand and, you know, can do stuff where you don't jump out of the line once the tape is off, then that's great. So I'm just going to, I don't even know what this little thing is inside the flower, but I'm just adding, I want this to be a little bit brighter. And if you want a little extra different, you know, texture, you know, as we've done before, you can use the brush and just kind of tap it with some paint. And if you think that looks ugly, then take it off. And then here again, see, I made a little more gray. So we're just going to let that sit more. Yeah. So this is, you know, we'll just keep going over it. And so now I'm just being a little more specific in my lines, you know. And you can still blend it even if you're just using, you know, smaller lines. You just, by going over that with my black paint with white, I just blended that in. So it all depends on what you're going for. So all of your little lines, you know, you see these are a little more subtle, these are more dramatic, but I knew that I was coming back in to tone some of them down, just so. And if you want a really kind of dramatic and very graphic looking flower, that's fine. You just keep, this is all about how you want it to turn out. So everyone has their own style, and so I celebrate how everyone has their own way of doing it. So just keep, you know, slowly building up your paint and kind of changing your lines. That's a great thing about acrylic. You can add to it and adjust it until you get it exactly where you want it. But see, by having really bright whites and gray and really dark black, really gives a lot of nice depth to it. Because you know, you don't want all midtones or all grayscale. You really want some bright whites and some black, dark blacks. So, and it's just a slow build up. So you just keep going, and that's the thing, just keep going. And then, you know, and then you want to kind of take a step back and look and see, you know, what you kind of want to balance things out here. And then I'll come back in and work on this. This is looking a little strange in here. I think it's going to look strange anyway, just because of the perspective of the tip here. Anyway, so okay. All right. So I have added some more details to the flower and just kind of let it sit a little bit to dry so that I could make my whites whiter. And then what I wanted to do is, you know, and there's some things that are a little tacky and that if I want to, I can go back and add a little bit more detail or brighter white later. But what I wanted to show you is just how when you take the tape off, it really brings your painting together. Now, if I can get it off the table, that'll be one thing. So what I like to do is I hold it up here and then I pull away from the edge, you know, like this. And then this one is actually underneath it. So I'm going to start this one here. And just, you don't have to rip it off really fast, but I also think just pulling it at an angle also helps. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this one. And it really kind of brings your painting together. It gives it a really nice presentation. And you know what? It's okay if you have a few places that, you know, kind of the paint got a little bit underneath. That's okay. Or if you missed a few, you didn't quite get up to the edge, it's fine. But I think that you can see that it really kind of really kind of brings it together. All right, thank you very much. So, all right, and see now you can see how with having the white border, it really brings out the white in the flower. And I also went back in and kind of did some darker black in areas, you know, and if I wanted to, I can kind of make some of this stuff a little, tone it down a little, or, you know, and kind of crisp up the edge here. But you get the idea. So totally doable. You can do this just as with all of it, just focus on the basic shapes of the flowers to get started with. And if you don't want to use the painter's tape, totally fine. So anyway, just be slow about it. You all will take a longer time, you know, than I did, so yours will look amazing. I just know it. So anyway, that's this week's, and thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.